called Hot Seat Sunday that people have questions, and they don't always get answered by the specific questions don't always get answered in a sermon series or their devotions or whatever it is they're doing. And so we give an opportunity for people to ask kind of questions that they're facing from day to day, and how do they understand the Scriptures, how do the Scriptures guide them, and how to deal with those issues. Or, I just have theological questions and I'm not really sure, and I want to ask the question. And so that's what we do, and you're welcome to do it. We'll take questions from the floor, but there's also a box, and if there's no questions, there's no question and answer period. So it's up to you whether you want it or not. So when COVID hit, Crystal and I decided we wanted to reach our friends, and we hang out with two other couples who are not followers of Jesus. And we had shared our faith with them, but we just really wanted to make sure they understood clearly and share clearly. And so I asked them, I said, would you like to do Alpha together? We'll come over to our house. They were part of our bubble. So come over to our house, and we'll have a meal together, and we'll go watch the Alpha video. And then afterwards, I just asked a simple question, so what did you think? What stood out to you? And it was amazing, the conversations that we had after that. I'd like to say there was a glorious salvation of all four, but we went through the whole Alpha course, and they totally understood it. Two of them said, I'm still not convinced there's even a God. And the other two said, well, I'm thinking about it. And so, we went through it. We did our role to share Christ with them. But I found it very helpful to just use Alpha and follow along, because it's so well done. Then I was listening to a Shayla Visser, who leads Alpha Canada, and she said, when COVID hit, I just started asking everybody. I just said, hey, do you want to go through Alpha with me? And that just spurred me, and I thought, I have 3 sisters, and I'm just going to ask them if they want to go through Alpha. We'll meet online, we'll meet on Zoom, and once a week, and go through Alpha. Everybody's in COVID anyway, so they're not going anywhere. And two of my 3 sisters said, sure, I'll love to do it. And so we start going through Alpha. And out of that came an understanding. The Gospel's presented, and we got to talk about it. And one of my sisters began to talk about, she had a church background, but wasn't going to church or wasn't engaged with Jesus at all. In fact, she said, I know, so, this is a side, you pray for people and you go, is my prayer even getting through? So I prayed 30 years for my sisters. And we're doing the Alpha course, and they go to that verse, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if you'll answer the door, I'll come in and sup with you. And I said, so what did you think? And my one sister, who I've been praying for 30 years, said, I know Jesus has been knocking at my door for years. I just haven't opened the door. And while I was discouraged that she hadn't opened the door, I was encouraged that I had no idea. I've been praying, wondering, are my prayers doing any good? And then I'd quit praying for seasons, and then I'd say, I should be praying. And then I'd pray, and then I'd quit, and then I'd pray. And then here's an answer. God goes, okay, I'm going to open the door and let you know that I've been working on her heart for all these years that you've been praying. You just didn't know it. So just keep praying. So that was really encouraging to me, but that's got nothing to do with the story I wanted to tell you. But I just wanted to encourage a little bit with that story. And so we're talking about her needing to open the door and receive Jesus, using that metaphor. And she said, I know I should, but this is what's stopping me. My daughter has just come out as a lesbian, and I know that the church and Scripture say that's a sin, but I will never, ever, ever say or do anything that would make my daughter think I don't love her or support her. And if I choose Jesus, then I think that will send the message to her that she's wrong and I don't love her. So now I'm sitting, I have to respond to this. And my sister's made a very clear statement that she doesn't want to hear any contrary views against homosexuality, and that if Jesus thinks that it's wrong, well then, I don't really think I need Jesus. So my sister's eternity is at stake here. Now I have a choice. I can just quietly go accept what she says and say, well, if that's what you want to believe, that's what you believe, and skirt the issue. Or I can say to my sister, following Jesus, there's a cost. And the greatest thing you can do is love Jesus for your daughter. Because your daughter is choosing sin over choosing God. And that's not going to turn out well for her. I kind of got halfway through that explanation, and then she kind of shut it down, didn't want to hear it. And I carried the weight of that conversation. And now she continued to meet with me, and we finished off Alpha. But that kept coming up over and over, and each time I felt like, I know she doesn't want me to, she wants me to change the view and tell her something different. And I don't want to lose the relationship with my sister. But she needs to know the truth. And so I was caught in that tension. And I think you are caught in that tension at different times as well. Maybe that issue, maybe a totally different issue. Maybe your sister, your brother, could be your parent, could be your grandchild, could be your child, could be a friend, could be whatever, whoever. That you're put in a place where you know if you are true to the Scriptures and to the gospel, it's going to cause conflict in that relationship. And it's easier, rather than to say, well, I'm not affirming, to say nothing. It's easier to just, to be expressive or supportive of somebody changing their sexual orientation than it is to say, this is dangerous. It's easier to say nothing to somebody who says, well, I don't need God, and I don't want God, and I don't want to hear about God. It's easier to say nothing than it is to say, well, I do follow God, and I am a follower of Christ. It's easier to take the more comfortable road and to fit in than it is to be true to the gospel. Now, when I say be true to the gospel, I'm not talking about being that obnoxious, self-righteous person. We covered that last night. I'm talking about lovingly, caringly standing for what is true. It's just easier to avoid that. And as Jesus winds down his sermon, remember he said, I want you to be my salt and light. I want you to be in this world, to be preserve what is the truth, the righteousness, preserve truth in this world. And I want you to be light, point people to God. And you'll do that as you obey me and follow me in what I command you to do. Because when we obey Jesus, people see Jesus. And then he starts talking about all these areas and what it means to obey him, which was very different than what the teaching they were getting in the synagogues. This was all about the heart, obeying God and having a heart for both God and for people, and standing for righteousness but not being self-righteous. It was very different. And so we've walked our way through chapters 5 through 7. And then here we're kind of winding down. This is Jesus bringing his sermon. It's his conclusion. And he says, now, enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. Now see the contrasts that come out in this verse. There are two gates. There's a big gate and a little gate. And there's a big door at the back right here. Most of us go through that. And there's this little tiny door up here. And when you open it up, it's rocks and you got to step down and it's the hard way. And he says most people go through the big gates. Now if you ever get a chance to go to Jerusalem, I'd say, take that opportunity, or Israel. And Jerusalem, you'll see the walls that have been there for thousands of years. And there's some of these huge gates, and they're massive, massive gates. It's all stone protection around them because they were built for that reason. and tons and tons of people are going in and out, in and out, in and out. But then there's these little gates at different places, and very few people go to those. So there's the first contrast. There's big gates where many people go, and little gates where few people go. Now the next contrast is the road through the big gate is easy. It's easy to travel, which makes sense. If a lot of people are going on that road, then they probably engineered that road to be easy. They take out the steep climbs and the steep drops, and they level it out and make it easy to travel. But few people go on this road because it's so hard. The road is steep, and it's rocky, and it's bumpy, and it's not always fixed. And so you got two different gates, you got two different roads. And through the big gate where everybody goes, it's the easy road. And through the little gate where few go, it's the hard road. And then Jesus says another contrast. He said that big, broad gate where everybody walks leads to destruction, and many enter it. But the little gate leads to life, but only a few find it. Jesus is a unique teacher. He goes, yeah, I know as I preach, a lot of you aren't going to listen to me. That's what he's saying. Like a lot of you are just going to keep going on the road that's easy and comfortable and where everybody else is. And I know that there'll just be a few that are going to take the small gate that leads to the hard road. The reality is Jesus knew when he was calling us to be his light and salt in this world, that he was calling us to something difficult. If you're not finding the Christian life difficult, you need to ask your question, why? If it's not awkward to be a Christian in your family that isn't Christian, in your workplace that isn't Christian, among your friends that aren't Christian, if there are not times when it's awkward, when you feel a tension between do I be quiet or do I speak up, if you're not feeling that tension, if it's not hard at times to obey Jesus and not go with the crowd, well then you got to question, are you in the faith that Jesus is describing? Because he said, if you're going to follow me, it's going to be the small gate, there's few on it, it's a bumpy road, it's hard at times. And I really find there's a desire and tendency in our world today to fit in and not make waves. Again, I'm not talking that Jesus is calling us to be obnoxious, self-righteous people that are out there telling everybody they're condemned going to hell. He is calling us to be gracious, compassionate people that are telling people that Jesus is the answer to the sin that will eventually lead you to hell, to destruction. There's difference in the way we communicate to people when we love them versus when we are self-righteous. But it doesn't change the fact that we are to be salt and light in our world, and that can be hard at times. So I hope that's encouraging to some of you here, because it is hard for you. It's hard for you with your family, your grandchildren who are taking roads and you're going, whoa, I don't know how to even handle this. What do I say? What do I do? And it's hard to be with your family that are struggling with your views versus their views, or a workplace, or your friend. It's hard to stand for Jesus. I get it. He said it would be. That should be comforting to us. We're on the right road. Because, my feeling is, when I was talking to my sister, well, maybe I'm just being wrong. So that's where, when you start to feel like you're hurting somebody because you're sharing truth with them that they don't want to hear, then you start to ask yourself, well maybe I'm being wrong about this. There's a woman in our church, we were talking, and I don't know what prompted the conversation, but she works for some huge corporate entity downtown Toronto, and she was in a boardroom, and that's when all the residential school findings were starting to come out. And then people were, this is what happens. You know what happens. You're in the lunchrooms. You're in the dressing rooms. You're with your friends gathering when you're talking around golf. Whatever it is, this topic comes up, and it really turned to a dumping on the church as a whole. So you can't trust the church. The church, they're all a bunch of hypocrites. They look at what they're doing. Why would you ever want to follow them? Why would you ever believe in God? That's the way the conversation went. And she said, I knew it was time for me to take the narrow door at that point and be the one person in the room that's going to speak for God. And she said, to be honest with you, I'd kind of been the covert Christian up until that point. And these are high-powered execs that are all around her. She's one of them. She's all alone. And so out of her mouth, she said, I can hardly believe, out of my mouth came, this is a travesty. What is happening, and what has happened in those residential schools? And I know God, and this is not God's heart for people, but that God is a God of compassion, and this breaks his heart. And my prayer for these people is that God would somehow bring healing where man has brought pain. So the place was quiet. And she said, well, I guess that was my coming out party. They now know who I am. That's the situations we're going to be put in. Might not be a corporate boardroom. Might be a dressing room. Could be in a family dinner at a table. Could be with a friend. Could be with your sister online. There are times when we have to choose, are we going to be with the crowd or are we going to walk with Jesus? Which one? You can't avoid it if you're going to be a Christian. You can't. You won't. The world won't let you avoid it. And that's why Jesus said, there's two roads. You get to choose which road, but you don't get to choose where the road leads. Right? You can choose the road, but you can't choose the destination. And then he says, and he adds to this, now watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing. So, interesting picture. They're wolves dressed up in sheep's clothing, meant to deceive us. Right? That's what he's saying. Now, Jesus is saying, you are going to have people come who are intentionally going to come into your midst to deceive you. Like they're in sheep's outer clothing, they appear outside to be like sheep. And remember, we're sheep. We're the sheep of his pasture. They appear like us. They say they believe the same things, but inside they're like ferocious wolves. Their desire is to consume and destroy. But by their fruit you will recognize them. When you listen to what they say and you watch how they live, you will know if a person is truly a follower of Christ. Now, ultimately, I get it. We can't judge the heart. Jesus isn't telling us to judge the heart. He just says, if you listen to their words and watch their actions, and they're not living up to what they say they're living up to, then you need to be aware. Do people pick grapes from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? Well, of course, grapes don't come from thorn bushes. Right, so you see good fruit, and you see righteousness, and you see a person passionate for Jesus and living that out, well, then obviously they know Jesus. But if they don't have that, then you got to question, is that a person that I want to follow? Not our job to judge them. It's not our job to expose them. It's our job to ask ourselves, is that a person I'm going to follow? Likewise, every good tree always bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, and a bad tree cannot bear good fruit. And his point is, just listen to the words and look at the life, and if what you see and hear doesn't match up to what I'm teaching you, then avoid. We need to be discerning. See, that this, by the way, comes right on the heels of that famous verse, judge not, right? And Jesus is here telling us, no. I want you to judge. I want you to be, remember that word can mean, if you weren't here, that word judge, that word is a wide, broad word. It can mean condemning, critical spirit, but it also can mean a discernment and a wisdom. And I think that's how Jesus is using the concept now is you need to be discerning and wise for yourself, for your family, if you're a leader in your church, for your church. We don't just accept everything because somebody says it and we don't want to have love. The best way to love our people is to be honest and to be discerning. So Jesus says every tree that does not bear good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire, and thus by their fruit you'll recognize. There are bad trees, there are good trees. Just understand which one is and be careful which one you listen to. Not everyone who says to me. Now here, this is a scary verse for me. I'm a pastor. It's scary for me as an individual, but also because I pastor a flock of people, I always am concerned about this verse. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Not everybody who says I'm a Christian is a Christian. You'll know Christians by how? Their fruit. They do the will of the Father. And you'll know you're a Christian by the fruit. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to struggle with sin. I mean, we've got to take this whole scripture together. This is just one verse. And it doesn't mean if a person sins, that guy's not in the, he doesn't have the Christ, or they're not a Christian. It means as you look at your life, the reality is it's easy to say, I'm a Christian, but are you truly walking with Jesus, struggling with your sin, overcoming, having points of victory, having points of failure, going back to the cross, living out the Word, obeying Him? Is that describe your life, or is it, I come Sunday? What about the rest of your week? Yeah, what about that? There's a difference. And so Jesus said, just because you say, Lord, Lord, just because you prayed a prayer when you're 4, or just 8, doesn't mean you're in the kingdom. Many will say to me on that day, now this always shocks me. Many will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name and drive out demons in your name and perform miracles? Like if I see somebody prophesying and I go, wow, like that's wisdom, and that seems insightful. And man, they did a miracle, and they drove out demons. I got to think, wow, the power of God is on them. And Jesus says, just because they come and say that, He will say, I'll tell you plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers. The reason I laughed is, boy, that's a pretty negative passage. You don't understand the passage unless you truly believe that there are supernatural powers that impact our world, both good and evil. And so people can drive out demons and do supernatural works by a different power than the Holy Spirit. And so what Jesus is saying, just because you can do these miraculous works doesn't mean you belong to me. It's when you bear the fruit of obedience in your life. That's what I'm looking for, says Jesus. So I just want to talk about 2 things as I end. The internet is an incredible tool, and there's a lot of good that is done, just like any tool. It can be good or it can be evil. But but it's very easy to make a nice site and then go up and put your teaching on it. And you may be way off. But if you're not discerning to what you're listening to on the internet, it's very easy to be deceived. Just because it's in the internet or in a book doesn't mean it's true. You have a guide that will tell you if it's true or not. So whatever you're listening to, whatever speakers you're listening to, like right now, if I don't, or the speaker you're listening to does not align with the truth of the Scriptures, then stop listening. Yeah, but I'm not really sure. Well, then do you have a pastor? Do you have friends who understand the Scripture? Ask them. I'm just a little bit concerned with how often I hear people quoting people from the internet, but they don't really know what the person's teaching other than one point they made that sounded good or may have even been good, but it's the rest of the stuff that they have to be careful of. But they're not discerning because that one point seemed really good. So be discerning when it comes to what you're listening to, who you're listening to. Always don't substitute their words for the Scripture. use their words to help you understand the Scripture. There's a difference. The second thing I want you to be aware of is, in our world, is that there's this battle going on within the church as a whole. How do we relate in a culture that is no longer favorable to Christianity? It's moving more and more away from Christianity. Now, I gotta say, Christianity was the dominant social influence in our culture for hundreds of years. It is no longer that. In fact, it has moved to become quite pushed off to the side. And in fact, some of the failures of Christianity and the way that we as a church, I'm speaking church as a whole, used power in our society previously is now coming back on us. We used to use the power to marginalize and attack people who thought differently than us. Just think about what it meant to be a homosexual in the 60s and 70s in Canada. Just think about what it meant to be an immigrant in Canada. And the views of the church and the power that the church used through politics in order to oppress and push down people and attack people. Now guess what? Guess what's happening to us? What we did, I'm saying the corporate we, none of us may have been part of it, but what we did, the church did to the culture and people in the culture that it disagreed with, now the culture is doing to the church and using the power of culture to push down the church. It's kind of like we are receiving what we reaped. Don't be mocked, God says. You, meaning us, you will reap what you sowed. And I think to a degree, the culture isn't all our fault. I'm just saying to a degree, we are now in the seat that we used to be in the power seat, and now we're in the receiving seat, and it's changed. And I wonder if this isn't part of the reality of what we deserve. We're reaping what we sowed in decades and millennia gone by. Regardless, now the church is a minor influence in our culture. In fact, often we're a voice against culture. Have you noticed that? You come here and listen to me speak or your pastor speak, and you go, boy, what that guy's talking about, if I said that out in my circle of friends, phew. And so there's a movement within the church in general called progressive Christianity. And the design of progressive Christianity is to fit in with the culture of the day. So it takes some of the good things of the church and takes the issues of the culture and combines them into one thing called this new movement called progressive Christianity. And so what it takes is, we really think that justice, which is that belonged to Jesus, right? The church has fought for justice since the beginning of its inception. It's not something new. Black Lives Matter or Me Too are not movements that come from values outside of Jesus. That's the value of Jesus, to fight for those that are vulnerable and marginalized and hurt. That was always what the church does and always what it did. And it should be today. So they picked that, the justice movement, the environment, protecting the environment and caring for people and having compassion on people. All good things it takes with it. And then it goes, but we want to affirm people, all people, so we affirm LGBTQ+. We affirm transgender, but we get rid of the hard things of Christianity, like hell and judgment and the belief that only Jesus is the way to salvation, and the Bible, because there's too much in the Bible that contradicts our culture. And so we'll get rid of those things, and we'll keep this and add this, and now we have a new church, the new church for Canada. This is the way we're all going. This is the way that the right way to go is what they're saying. This is the way that we will now impact and coexist with our culture. But the reality is we're getting rid of the hard stuff in order to fit in. So be very careful. Some of you may not be aware of this. Some of you may run into this. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Progressive Christianity is a sense to remove the hard things of our faith and the things that Jesus said in order to fit in with the culture in which we live. So be aware. Wide is the gate, and easy the road, and many that travel on it. narrow is the door, and hard is the road, and few are those that walk with me. And we all have to make those choices in the lives in which we live, the families we live, the workplaces that we are at, the friends that we have. There are times when we have to choose which gate we're going through. And Jesus says, follow me through the narrow gate. Now, I don't think I told you anything you don't know. I don't think this is any news to you. You know what I'm telling you? I want to encourage you, because when you start going through the narrow gate, you start to feel alone, and you start to feel like, maybe I'm wrong. Because everybody is going that way. It's hard to walk against culture. I just want you to know that Jesus said, hey, you want to follow me? This is the road. Come on with me. Come on with me. Yeah, it'll be hard at times. It's going to be bumpy. It's going to be rough. There's going to be times when you're feeling all alone. You're going to feel like but expect that. I'm your guide. I'm walking with you. Don't give up and return to the wide gate and the wide road. Keep going. Keep going. That's the road I'm on, says Jesus. Come on with me. Let me pray over you. Jesus, today, I pray that would be the message of encouragement for your people who are here. And I just know, even though I don't know people's lives here, I know from being a pastor at our church that there are times in their homes, in their family gatherings, at work, on the sports fields, or in the dressing rooms with friends, that these issues are huge. And I pray for strength and courage for your people here to be able to walk the narrow road and so be salt and light in a world that fights this thinking. Would you give us power and courage to keep going?